Now, this is a truly rare and exciting piece, I think. It's extremely rare on the roadshow to see what I consider to be wonderful pieces of sculpture. And here is something that, the like of which I haven't seen for years and years. Now, tell me, where does it come from?
This has been in my family, well, forever as far as I know.
And do you know who she is?
We're told it's my great-grandmother.
And you know who the sculptor is?
I've read on the back.
Dalou.
Dalou, yes.
Aimé Jules Dalou, 1838 to 1902, was one of the founder figures in the sense of modern sculpture. When he was young in France, he reacted against the formal classical traditionalism of the French sculptural world, and he became well known for his humanity, his naturalism. In 1870-71, he got into trouble politically. He took part in the Commune in Paris, which meant he had to flee, and he came to England. And he was in England between 1871 and 79, which of course is when they could have met, because I believe the date is what?
It's dated 1873.
That's perfect. While he was in England, he taught at the South Kensington School of Art, and therefore formed the taste for modern sculpture in Britain. So he's a key figure, and his way of working, of course, takes us straight to Rodin. When you look at this piece, you're looking at Impressionism in sculpture. Look at the wonderful free way it's drawn. It's not just the details of the face, she's a very pretty woman, but look at the way the hair is drawn. It's so simple, so casual. You've got these plaits drawn up. It's almost like a sort of photograph. It's just been taken instantaneously. This is a critical piece of sculpture, not just in the forming of French taste, but more important in the forming of British taste. British sculpture was never the same again after the impact of Dalou. There is some damage. There are cracks occurring, unfortunately, across the face. This is the nature of terracotta. You know, it's quite a low-fired material. I've never sort of even handled a Dalou, so to be able to touch it is a wonderful moment.
And I have to carry it home.
You have to carry it home. I suppose we have to think about value.
Well, I'd like an idea because, as you say, it's an unusual thing, and I know absolutely nothing about that sort of thing, that world.
Well, if I told you that not that long ago, a Dalou bust sold at Sotheby's for over £30,000, gives you some idea of where we're going. This is not on that league. That was a prettier one, and it had no damage. But I think if we said £20,000-25,000, we wouldn't be far adrift. He's a really major figure. And to me, it's as though you've brought a Monet into the roadshow.
It's great granny that sits up there on a high shelf in the living room.
To you, she's your great granny. To me, she's a great piece of art, and I'm so delighted to see it. It's really made my year. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My father was an art dealer in the 20s and the 30s. We believe he bought these at auctions sometime in the 1940s.
Now, the ship plates, which I think are the greatest production of that factory, there were actually 10, so you've got 8 of the set here, and they were designed by a local artist, maritime artist called Arthur Bradbury, in about 1931. And he designed the series to represent the history of shipping in Poole. So they go from the medieval period up to what was nearly the present day in that time. And so they are local history, but at the same time, they're also, to me, wonderfully decorative objects. They're so expressive of the way the Poole process, the Poole technique worked. Now, I have to ask you, looking around, a lot of them, I'm afraid, are damaged.
Yes.
Now, how has that happened?
They were up the stairs, and
up the stairs, yes.
Our cleaning lady put the hoover over her shoulder and walked up the stairs, knocking them one by one. My father at the bottom going, no!
Oh, no. So each one crashed to the ground?
They did, I'm afraid. And then obviously he stopped her before she got to the top.
So the ones that survived were the ones that were higher up?
I think so, yes.
Have you got any favourites?
I like this one a lot.
The Harry Pay?
Yes.
The ones...
also, this one, the Viper, I think.
The Viper, I think, is great.
Yes.
Now, that one, which also has a view of Old Harry Rocks in the back, which I like very much, that was the first man of war to be built for the Navy in Poole. I like very much the whaler, because that, again, is part of Poole's history. In the late 18th century, Poole was a whaling town. There is the plate confirming it. But my two favourites, and the ones, in fact, I have to confess I've got at home, the Water Witch. That's your favourite. I think this is a wonderful ship. Built in 1871 by Midas of Poole, a local ship, in the China clay trade. So this ship was seen, tied up at the quay in the 1930s. And if we turn it over, we find always they have this inscription, 1932, and the designer and the painter. Margaret Holder did most of them. Ruth Paverley, another key artist, did some of the others. The girls who painted these were looking out of the windows. And in some cases, they could actually see these ships in the harbour sailing past. Another story, though, of course, of local relevance is the Polly. Now, this is a trawler built by the Allens at Hamworthy in 1906, a very local ship, a ship, again, very famous in the harbour, a very fast, well-sailing ship. And the great thing about the Polly, which was owned by the same family, the Haynes, until 1978, is that she survives. She's under restoration now with another owner in Brixham. So this ship, depicted here, soon will be sailing again. So that completes this story. I have this one because I have a daughter called Polly, and so I had to have, of all the ones I had to have, this was the one. So they're one of the greatest collectibles, I think, of Poole. Have you any idea what was paid for them?
I wouldn't think a lot.
No, not at that date. And you haven't followed the prices of Poole particularly.
No.
Right. I mean, the good news is that the big ones now sell for about £1,000 each. The smaller ones for about 800, 700. The bad news is, of course, the damaged ones are worth very little. Yes. 150, 200 pounds.
Yes.
They could be restored, but it's much too expensive to do so.
Yes.
So enjoy them. I've never seen a set like this, and if you're really fanatical, you could look out for the missing too.
Right.
As far back as I can remember, it's hung on the wall of each one of the homes that I've lived in.
And you adore it?
Oh, I love it, yes. Just the vibrancy of the colour, and I'm very much an outdoor person, so it's the type of homestead I'd love to live in myself.
So it belonged to your parents, did it?
It belonged to my parents, yes. My father was an artist, a Yorkshire man, quite an avid traveller with his paint box, and I was given to understand that he actually met Fred Hall.
Fred Hall died in 1948, I think. So.
Oh, well, then he was within my father's lifetime.
So your father probably painted with him, maybe?
Maybe. That I can't qualify.
Because this is really, the thing about a picture like this is it's a real artist painting.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's a painting that, as you say, breathes light colour, and it's somebody who's really thought about it. Because the interesting thing about Fred Hall is that as a young man in Newlyn, he was a bit sort of heavy-handed and pedantic.
Yes.
But he was a great experimenter with paint. He loved to push paint around to see what it would do for him.
Right.
And so, unlike a lot of artists who flower in youth and get pedantic and boring later on, Fred Hall was the opposite. He was always pushing paint around, and he got better and better.
Yes.
And so this is a later painting by him. But it's full of the joy of painting, isn't it?
Yes, you'd call it springtime, wouldn't you? The freshness in the greens are the spring greens, aren't they? Yes, and I love the way he's captured the sunlight on the hedge on this side and the roof and the wall.
I suppose it's in the spirit of the times. I think people like space and air today. Mm-hmm. Not the claustrophobia of Victorian England.
No,
They like exactly the opposite. And so this sort of painting is very much in our spirit today.
Yes.
And so, because it's a popular painting, I think it would do very well today.
Really?
Well, I would say probably around sort of £8,000 to £12,000.
Really? Oh my!
For me, even though I'm not Cornish, the high point of any journey to the West Country is crossing the Royal Albert Bridge, and here we have it in replica. I've always had a passion for Brunel. I've always had a passion for this bridge in particular, and to me this is a magic moment. Here we have it. Where does it come from?
I believe it came from a gentleman who was an apprentice in the dockyard back in the 1850s.
Right.
I was always led to believe.
So it's a family piece?
So it's been handed down through the family.
And you've always had it in your house or in your family house?
In my time.
Yes, in your time.
Yes.
Now, this bridge was completed or opened in 1859. It was Brunel's last great design. And when he was dying, and the bridge was just opened in time, he was transported across, lying on a flat railway truck, and he died very soon after. It was a revolutionary bridge for all sorts of reasons. Emotionally, it was the first physical link between Cornwall and England, if you like, that made it possible to travel all the way to Cornwall by train. And so this bridge really represented the boundary with Cornwall. Once you'd crossed the Tamar, you were there. It's a wonderful structure because it's so high. You climb up above the houses and then down through Saltash to get across the river. And this was all because the Admiralty said the bridge had to be far above the mast height at high tide of any ship that went under it. He had to invent a new technology to do it. This tubed construction using iron had never been tried before. And with all his works, everybody said, it'll never work, it'll fall down, it'll collapse, the trains will fall into the river. And of course, he was right. To me, he was a fantastic hero. The great builder of ships, the Great Britain, the Great Eastern, designer of mobile hospitals for the Crimean War, but above all, the engineer of the Great Western Railway. And this was one of the supreme achievements, I think, of a wonderful man. But of course, the question is, what do we do with this? It's got all these numbers, up to 52. Weeks of the year. What do you hang in all these slots? Do you know?
Well, I always thought it was pipes,
What sort of pipe?
clay pipes.
So long churchwardens clay pipes
Yes.
would fit there, but do you smoke a different pipe? Not you. Does one smoke a different pipe every week of the year?
Well, I assume that clay pipes broke very quickly when they were smoked, or
they do.
they burnt through.
They burnt
and
through.
Perhaps they
so
needed
maybe
more
you,
of them.
But would you hang the whole year's supply out? I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know.
Is it a scoring system for a game? 52 cards? You know, there's all sorts of possibilities. I think it remains a mystery. But that, to me, is not the important thing. That's a curiosity which we probably won't solve. But it's just such an exciting thing to see because the bridge is here. You know, nothing could be better in Plymouth than to have, for me, than to have this bridge. It is a remarkable thing. Beautifully made and a highly desirable object. What do you do with it?
It hangs on the wall in the house, and it will pass through my family, hopefully.
Quite right.
It was my mother's wish that it never left the West Country.
And so it shouldn't.
And if, you know, any of us chose not to keep it, then it was to be given to Cornwall as a
I
gift.
think it's absolutely right. It should stay here. It's part of the history because
Yes.
I'm sure it's contemporary with the opening of the bridge.
Yes.
And therefore, I would see, in the right sort of environment, £3,000 asked for it.
Just that. Ooh.
I think so.
About the piece itself, do you know about it?
Well, I've had it for about 20 years. It belonged to an aunt of mine. She had it, I don't know for how long, I suppose again about 20 years, and it was given to her by a friend and admirer. How long it had been in his family, I don't know.
It just goes back as long as, beyond what you can remember anyway.
Absolutely, yes.
With the factory mark, Bermontoft's Faience, grand sounding name, used by the Leeds Fireclay Company. They started as an architectural firm making glazed bricks and pieces for buildings, and they got into the great Victorian craze of making art pottery, particularly vases and models of animals in bright coloured glazes. And then around 1880s, about 1886, 1887, they employed a very skillful decorator to do the Anglo-Persian style, as they advertised it. And this is the mark of the painter, a little monogram here, which is taken a bit an L and a K.
Yeah.
And that mark appears on all the factory's pieces in this wonderful style. But the sad thing is, we don't know who it belongs to. The mark was clearly someone very skilled who understood high Victorian taste of the time, but we don't know their name at all, so remains anonymous. And because of that, it perhaps gets condemned a bit as a copy of the better-known William de Morgan pottery.
Yes, I've heard of that.
You know,
Yes.
the great designs of the time. And de Morgan's pieces, inspired by the same Islamic art, were the height of fashion in the 1880s, shown in great exhibitions in London. And the Leeds factory felt, well, we can do just as well.
Yes.
And I think in many ways they did. When you've got the thought behind the design, it really works so well. The way these snakes coil around, and the background with the little plants just growing up inside there. It's probably not yet in the same level as William de Morgan, who will always be the great leader of the field. But even a good old Bermontoft piece is certainly going to be, I would think, £4,000 or £5,000.
Really? It's amazing.
Well, as far as I know, it's always been in the family, certainly for 100 years. And I'm told that this sort of thing was fashionable in the 1860s, and there were a number of family christenings around that time, and it could have been a present given to one of my ancestors then.
Right. It's a nursery rhyme cabinet, so it's clearly for a child. It's painted in a very lively manner with these sort of pseudo-medieval scenes, which take us, as you rightly say, straight into the late Victorian period. A number of artists in the 19th century made painted furniture. There's a whole tradition that starts with Pugin, goes through Burgess, and on and on and on, of people who concentrated on the production of really lavish painted furniture. Now, it'd be lovely to say this is one of those. It is, you know, it belongs to a descendant of that tradition. And when one looks at the images, you say you've got Goosey Goosey Gander, you've got the Black Sheep, you've got the Queen of Hearts, and you've got something. I've no idea. And one needs to do research in a book of fairy stories to find what is going on here. Somebody delivering a letter to a princess. There's a stork. Now, a painted piece like this wonderfully rich. It's part of, as I say, of a Gothic tradition. But the images themselves, I think, come much more from a sort of arts and crafts tradition, the aesthetic movement, and all that love of decorative amateurishness that was part of the late 19th century. Presumably you have no idea who might have painted it.
Well, somebody suggested rather ingeniously that this was in fact a crane,
Right.
and there, of course, is water, and that was an obscure signature of Walter Crane, but other people have scoffed at this idea. I don't know what you
Well,
think.
it's a lovely idea. I mean, it's a wonderful idea for a rebus, Walter Crane.
Yeah.
Walter Crane, the great designer, book illustrator, children's books, particularly of this period, did design things like this. But I think there's a better candidate. There's a man called Henry Stacey Marks, who was a tile painter and decorator, independent artist, who worked a lot with Mintons. And he produced a set of tiles and designs called the Seven Ages of Man, which were in exactly the same sort of costumes and settings as these. There's a slightly curious sort of primitive nature to it, which makes me think it's actually by somebody who was, in a sense, a trained amateur. Now, that's not in any way diminishing the object. It might have even been somebody in your family. And so while one is not saying it's by Stacey Marks, it certainly has his style and his stamp all over it. And that very much fits in with what you say. You know it in your family since the 1880s.
Yes, and there certainly was an artist in the family who, even if he didn't do this himself, might have had friends who could have done it.
Now, obviously, the lack of a name affects the value. Do you have any idea of its value?
Well, I've been told about 2,500, but that seemed rather little to me.
Well, I'm afraid I think it's about right. If we could say definitely Burgess, definitely Gilbert Saunders, definitely any of the great names, you could say 5,000, 10,000, you can climb up as high as you like. With no name, I think 2,000 to 3,000 is about absolutely right.
Yes, but quite difficult to replace, I suppose.
Irreplaceable,
Yeah.
unless you want to paint another one.
Yes.
Here's a task. For him, paint the bed that should go with it.
For lo, the winter is past, the rain is over and gone. We go on here. The flowers appear on the earth. The time of the singing of the birds is come. It's wonderful, really. It's a wonderful image of spring, this picture.
I would have read it the other way round.
That's very contrary on me.
Yes,
Well, anyway,
I know.
we've got the message.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful image of spring. Such detail. Here's the blackbird, and he's singing away. Spring's come. This is glorious branch of apple blossom, isn't it?
Yes.
Look at the way he's painted it. I mean, the detail in here is so fantastic. This is actually, now one looks at it, a really great example of what's called Pre-Raphaelite painting. And it's mid-Victorian, painted under the influence of the Pre-Raphaelites. That's to say, the painters who painted with very strong colours, very minutely, in the most wonderful detail. And this is a great example. I've been looking at it for some time, wondering who the artist is, because there's no evidence of a signature on the front. But now I'm looking around the back, and I see that there is some evidence that actually you haven't been dusting terribly well.
No, only on the front.
Only on the front. Anyway, so it came straight down off the wall, and
Yes.
there is this wonderful monogram here, JSR. It's by John Samuel Raven. He was a very interesting artist in the middle of the last century, obviously influenced by the Pre-Raphaelites, but not that well known. I mean, we only know him from his works, and they're of tremendous quality. There's a picture you've inherited.
Yes.
So I
I've
can
always
see-
remembered it in my parents' house, but I can't remember it any further back. But
Yes.
it's got Merwood on the back, which was a family home going back generations.
Right. Well, it's a wonderful thing to have in the family, a wonderful thing to be able to enjoy on the wall now. You've got it insured, I hope.
No.
You haven't got it insured. Well, I think it would do extremely well, actually, at auction. Probably make somewhere between £6,000 and £8,000. Probably insure it for 9,000 or 10,000,
Right.
and take the cobwebs off as well.
Don't they have? Don't they have to?
Do you know who all these people are?
Yes, this is my great-great-grandfather and his family. This was painted about 1820. They lived in Leith, just outside Edinburgh.
It's a really amazing picture. I think it's so nice, very intimate.
But it is nice, and we're very fond of it, but the trouble is we've no idea who the artist was.
Ah, well there, I might be able to help you because it was exhibited in the Scottish National Gallery in 1956.
Yes.
At which point they attributed it to the son of a very well-known miniaturist.
Yes.
the son's name being Charles Robertson. It does seem to fit. The date is exactly right.
Yes.
Well, within a year of what you suggested. And also, the idea of it being by a miniaturist explains quite a few things about this picture that intrigue you otherwise.
Yes.
For example, there's a sort of clumsiness in the perspective and the technical merit of the picture that makes you think that the artist wasn't used to painting such big pictures.
There is a school of thought that he painted one head and put it on all the bodies.
I think he would have had to stay with your family for quite some while before he'd finished this picture. It would have taken him, I feel, months. It's got that kind of meticulous attention to detail as well that a miniaturist painter might use. And one of our experts has identified this toast rack as the Robert and Cadman patent expanding toast rack, patented in 1807. Such is the detail that he can tell that. All these figures are really well arranged. You've got this lovely kind of compositional circle going on of glances and looks. And the whole thing finished off by the father, who's got a look of slight dismay on his face. And I think it's...
not surprised.
Not as much as her look of dismay.
Well, I think that's a look of resignation, isn't it?
Yes, it has to be. But anyway, I think he's actually looking across to one of his sons here, and he's saying, "Don't you bring that dead duck in here. He's dripping blood all over the carpet." But what I really like about this picture is the faces of each of the children. I think their characters are all immediately identifiable. On the whole, a ravishing picture, a real cross-section of life as it must have been.
But artistically not.
Well,
it doesn't worry me. I mean, I like it. Yes,
technically, perhaps it falls down in some ways, but it's so charming. It transcends all of that, I think. And to put a value on the picture, well, now that is difficult because, of course, the artist doesn't have really a good track record in the marketplace. Although we don't really mind who it's by, it's such a wonderful slice of life that it's got to command £15,000. I think it could even go up to £20,000 and perhaps more.
Goodness. But I wouldn't replace it.
You couldn't replace it?
Well, I couldn't replace it, no.
It's the most wonderful picture.
The whip has always been there.
Has it? Where's it been then, this much-loved picture?
I think it was in an old barn or a farm building for about 30 years. And then my father, he bought it about 20 years ago. I think it was a house sale for a few pounds. It wasn't expensive.
What did he think about it?
He liked it, but we didn't know how to get it restored.
Right.
So it just got left. I've always assumed it was Waterhouse.
Do you know about Waterhouse?
I've seen an Antiques Roadshow before, and there was a painting on there by the same artist, and that's why I bought this today.
Right. But this is so untypical, this picture, that first of all we say, well, it's not really a Waterhouse. But it is signed JWW down here. And if I think about Waterhouse when he started painting, he was sort of experimenting. He wasn't really very well trained when he started painting. He painted little interiors and this sort of thing. And I personally think this is by Waterhouse, John William Waterhouse, because I think it's the young man coming into being a better painter, and before he's really decided the subjects he really wants to do, which is his affinity to the Pre-Raphaelites and pretty girls. So, on balance, I'm going to say this is a genuine Waterhouse. And then we had to say, well, since you've looked after it so beautifully...
No, I'm not to blame for it.
Since you looked after it so beautifully, what's it worth? It's in rotten condition, but this can be put right, although I think that will be difficult to clean. This I'm not worried about, but the dirt is quite ingrained into that impasto there. I think between £5,000 and £10,000, £5,000 or £6,000.
Shocked. I am shocked. I am. I thought about £500. I was so worried about the whip.
Well, it's pretty nasty. That is horrid, you know, and that's needs a lot of work doing, and so does this. But I didn't see why, you know, finished and all done up, somebody might ask £20,000 for it or something.
So it's worth for me to take it and have it restored.
I think so, yes.
Who is he? My father. He was born in Australia, and he came to this country, and he took his degree in Scotland as a doctor. And then he always loved the sea, so he started by being a ship's doctor.
Gracious.
And that is when he was on the Carpathia and the
He was
Titanic.
on the Carpathia.
Yes. And
what was his job on the Carpathia?
as a doctor.
As the only doctor?
The only doctor,
Good
yes.
gracious.
Yeah.
It says, presented to Dr. McGee as a slight token of affection and esteem by these survivors of the Titanic, April the 15th, 1912.
Yes.
They must have felt incredibly warmly towards him. I mean, he was
I
just the
think
man
they were,
who had
yes,
pulled them back from the brink of death.
Yes, I think so.
What do you think happened that night on the Carpathia?
Well, he didn't talk about it too much because it was so awful. And he said there was, you know, all these frozen people he had to deal with brought out of the sea. And it was quite horrific.
Must have been terrifying.
He said it was terrifying, and of course there were lots of troubles which I won't go into about why it was so horrific. But he didn't want to talk about that too much either.
What an amazing story this is, because as you know at the moment there's a sort of fever of Titanic interest.
Yes.
Everybody's been to see the film. There have been huge reports in the press about the whole story of it, as to why it happened, why certain people got the lifeboats and other people didn't. Up here we have a Humane Society award for him and all his bravery at that time.
Yes.
He really must have been a most extraordinary and remarkable man.
Yes.
This is a silver medal.
Yes.
Presented by the Humane Society,
Society,
which went in conjunction with the certificate at the back. But this is something quite different. This is the most extraordinary thing. This is presented to captain, officers and crew of RMS Carpathia from the survivors of the Titanic, April 15th, 1912. That is made out of 14-karat gold.
Yes.
And there were only 14 of them made.
Oh, yes.
Did you know that?
I didn't know that, no.
It's an extraordinarily rare thing. Only the most outstanding officers received one of these awards.
Yes.
It's almost unheard of if you think in the whole world there are 14 of these objects. The even more peculiar thing is that one of these was sold recently.
Yes.
Now, presumably you would never consider selling any of these objects because they're all family objects.
Yes.
They are perhaps things that you might consider insuring.
Yes. Haven't insured them, yes.
I think it's extremely important you do so, because in New York, in 1997, one of these medals was sold for $50,000. So that equates roughly to £30,000 now.
George heavens. I know I do. Can't believe it.
So I think what we have here, looking at your whole collection of objects, are probably things that ought to be insured for £50,000.
Yes, thank you. Yes. It's amazing.
How can you measure one man's valour?
Indeed.
Thank you very, very, very much.
It's been a very moving day for us.